My dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you vanish tomorrow, this house wouldn't fall apart." He didn't shout it, he growled it. That moment played out right there in the living room, the same room where my whole family sat me down and told me I needed to sell my $320,000 hardware store, to bail out my brother. Again. Mom wouldn't even meet my gaze. She stared off to the side, like she couldn't bear to look at me. Margaret, my sister, sat with her phone in one hand and that smug little smirk on her face. The one she saves for special occasions, like when someone else gets screwed. I didn't argue. I just nodded. That night, I was gone. I left behind one key. That was it. A quiet exit. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. My hands, always coated in a fine layer of sawdust, carrying the faint scent of metal polish, felt oddly out of place as they gripped the wheel of my old pickup. That truck. I almost sold it years ago to help Dad with some so-called emergency medical bill he said he couldn't pay. Funny thing, once I wired him the cash, he never brought it up again. Not once. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. That's what families do, right? You pitch in when someone needs help. My store, Kohl's Supply, wasn't just a business. It was every splinter in my finger, every late-night inventory check, every handshake with a satisfied customer. That place was 8 years of my life built with grit, faith, and a very modest loan. I didn't build it on dreams, I built it on the belief that hard work mattered. That if you created something real, something useful, it would hold up. Turns out, I was right. The last time I needed a business valuation, it came in around $320,000. Now, I get it, some people might not call that a fortune. But for me, it was everything I had. Every bolt and board, every sale and satisfied customer. That shop wasn't just valuable, it was mine. It smelled like effort and felt like home. But Ryan, my brother, he had different plans. Always chasing the next big thing with zero interest in the grind. Crypto ventures, tech startups, trendy apps, none of which he actually understood. He didn't want to build, he wanted to disrupt. And every single project? Crash and burn. Still, my parents acted like he walked on water. Ryan was visionary, brilliant, their golden child. When he failed, they called it a setback. When I succeeded, they called it cute. I still remember Margaret calling my store a cute little hobby, like I was selling lemonade on the weekend. And sure, I helped Ryan out before. More than once. Small stuff, framed as loans he'd totally repay after his next breakthrough. Rent money, equipment, and even some shady debts he'd racked up that my folks pretended didn't exist. It was all under the flag of family sticks together. I really wanted to believe that meant something. I wanted to think I was truly part of that family circle, not just the guy they leaned on when things went south. That blind faith. That was on me. I see it clearly now. I wanted their respect so badly, I ignored the fact that their love had conditions. Then came the text from Mom. Family talk. Be here Sunday. 3 sharp. That old knot twisted in my stomach again. It wasn't a request, it was an order. And I already knew the script. Urgent family talk always meant Ryan had messed up again, and I was the one expected to fix it with my wallet. So I drove across town, headed back to the house I grew up in. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt more like a perfectly staged set, neat, polished, and completely fake. On the outside, it looked stable. On the inside? You could choke on the pressure in the air. Even the family portraits on the wall felt like they were judging me, reminding me of the role I was supposed to play in this never-ending show. They were all there, waiting in the living room. Dad sat stiff in his armchair. Mom was next to him, still avoiding eye contact. Margaret scrolled on her phone like this was all a waste of her time. When I walked in, she glanced up just long enough to give me that knowing smirk. Ryan? Nowhere in sight. Of course not. Golden boys don't show up when there's mess to clean, they just leave that part to everyone else. The small talk was quick, awkward. Then Dad cleared his throat like he was about to read from a script. Ryan's startup hit a snag, he said. Needs a serious cash boost. More than we can cover. Mom started wringing her hands. Margaret finally looked up from her screen, her smirk just barely growing. How much are we talking? I asked, though I already knew it was going to be bad. $260, Dad said, like he was asking me to spot him a few bucks for coffee. I froze. $260,000. That was nearly my entire store. My livelihood. Dad, I don't have that kind of money just sitting around, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You could sell the shop, Mom said quietly, still not meeting my eyes. It's worth more than that. You'd have some left over. Sell my store. Kohl's Supply. I just stared at them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're asking me to sell my entire business. The one I built from the ground up. That pays my bills. That supports me. It's just a hardware store, Margaret added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Ryan's close to something big. You could always start another one. This is about family, Dad said. Just like that. And my heart started pounding like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Family. That's what they called this. Expecting me to tear down the life I built from scratch just to bail Ryan out of yet another disaster. After everything I'd already done for him. I rattled off a few examples, paying off his mortgage 1 month, covering his rent another, helping with surprise bills that hit him out of nowhere. And never once asking for anything in return. Not even a thank you. They brushed it off like it was pocket change. That was different, Dad said, waving his hand like he was flicking away a fly. That was small stuff. This is serious. This is Ryan's future. And what about mine? I asked, trying to keep my voice level but feeling it start to rise. What about the years I gave up, the sacrifices I made? What about the fact that I've been the dependable one, the steady one, while Ryan? Dad cut me off by slamming his hand against the armrest, the sound sharp and final. Enough, he barked. We're not talking about Ryan's past. This is about family helping family. Your store's just a drop in the bucket compared to what Ryan could become. It's time you actually stepped up. His face was turning red, neck veins popping like cords under his skin. His eyes locked onto mine, not just stern now, but seething. And then he said it. Leaned forward, voice low and biting, slicing right through the air like a knife. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. That line didn't just hurt. It annihilated something in me. It wasn't a sharp sting or a slow ache. It felt like the oxygen got yanked from the room. My ears buzzed, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I stood there, reeling, listening to my own father reduce me to a placeholder. Like I didn't matter. Like I'd never mattered. It wasn't about the money anymore. Not really. It was about every moment I'd gone unseen, every time I'd been treated like a second thought. It was the moment the truth hit, this wasn't a family I belonged to. I was a tool. A safety net. A background character in their golden boy narrative. The hurt didn't linger. It exploded into a flash of fury so bright I could barely think. And then, just as fast, it faded into a kind of cold clarity. Everything snapped into place. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. Okay. I'd disappear. But not in the way they expected. Not in a way that gave them control. Not in a way that left me with nothing. I looked around the room one last time. My father, who had just gutted me with his words. My mother, still avoiding my eyes. My sister, frozen mid-smirk, like even she realized the line had been crossed. There was no warmth there. Just judgment. Disappointment that I wasn't obeying like usual. Okay, I said. Not agreement. Not submission. Just, acknowledgement. I stood up slowly, steadying myself. The silence felt thick. Nobody spoke. I didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't explain. I just walked out. Out of the room. Out of the house. Out of a life I'd bent over backward trying to fit into. That night, I packed a single suitcase, just the basics. I scanned all the important documents, licenses, bank statements, insurance. Uploaded everything to a secure cloud backup. Changed all my passwords. Set up alerts on my business accounts. This wasn't running away. This was strategic. This was me taking control. I left my apartment key under the mat at their house, right there on the kitchen counter. But that's not all I left. I placed the spare key to their home beside it. A silent, deliberate message. I was walking away from them. Not from my life. Not from my shop. Just from them. They woke up to an empty room and a note that read, "The shop is not yours to sell." Next to it, that spare key, gleaming on the counter like punctuation at the end of a sentence. By the time the morning hit, I was already checked into a rundown motel about 50 miles out. Cheap coffee in hand. Watching the sun peek over the roof of a diner across the street. My phone started lighting up before I'd even finished that first bitter sip. The screen buzzed, Mom's cell, then Dad's, then Margaret's number. I didn't answer. Just let it ring. An hour passed, and the voicemails came flooding in. The first few sounded like they were playing nice. "Thomas, where are you? Are you okay? We're worried about you." But it didn't take long for the tone to turn. "This isn't funny, Thomas. Pick up." Then came the guilt trips. "How could you do this to us? Your mother's in tears. You're tearing this family apart." And finally, the mask fell off completely. "You need to come back. Now. We need access to your accounts. No more pretending it was about Ryan. No more fake concern. Just raw entitlement." I sat there on the edge of that lumpy motel bed, phone in hand, listening to all of it. And yeah, it hurt. But it also confirmed everything I already knew. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could give. About what they felt entitled to. That house key I left behind. That probably pushed them over the edge. Because it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a quiet, calculated move that told them exactly what I'd done. I hadn't just left. I'd chosen to reclaim my life. My business. My peace. That motel room felt bare, impersonal, kind of lonely, but also fresh. The kind of clean you get after a storm clears out the wreckage. No more walking on eggshells. No more rehearsing how to say no. No more trying to be the version of a son they wanted, instead of just being myself. The motel smelled like cheap air freshener and bleach. It wasn't comforting. But it wasn't suffocating either. And for now, that was enough. I knew they wouldn't back off. Guilt and manipulation were just the opening moves. If that didn't work, they'd escalate. But something had changed in me. My head was finally clear. No more fog of trying to win their approval. No more bending to keep the peace. This wasn't about earning their respect anymore. This was about protecting what I'd built, and drawing a line they couldn't cross again. My first call was to a lawyer. Ms. Blake came highly recommended by a business contact. Her office wasn't flashy, small, neat, professional. Sitting across from her, retelling what happened that Sunday felt unreal. I said the words out loud, my father's voice echoing in my mind. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. It hit harder the second time. Sounded even colder when spoken in a quiet room. But Ms. Blake didn't flinch. No shock, no judgment. Just calm, steady professionalism. Your father's words, while incredibly harsh, she said evenly, aren't illegal. But their attempts to pressure you into giving up your business, and any interference with it, that might be a different story. You're the sole owner, she asked. Built it myself, I said. Incorporated a couple years ago. Good. That helps. We'll need to get everything in order, financial statements, proof of ownership, business records. And most importantly, any documentation of money you've given them. Bank transfers, texts, emails, anything showing past support. Working with her felt like finally getting my feet on solid ground after years of sinking sand. She didn't romanticize the idea of family. She dealt in facts, in legal protections. She reminded me, my business was mine. My money was mine. And their demands? Just noise. Meanwhile, back in their world, the outreach turned desperate. The voicemails got sharper, angrier. You'd better come back here, Thomas, or you'll regret it. Margaret started posting cryptic stuff online, vague, passive-aggressive updates about family betrayal and being hurt by those closest to you. She didn't mention names, but the target was clear. People in our circle started reaching out, awkwardly fishing. Hey man, saw Margaret's post, everything good? I kept it short. Polite. Non-committal. I wasn't getting sucked into the performance. No drama. No justifications. Back in the motel, I dug into years of digital records. Banking history, emails, texts. I laid it all out. And the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't the occasional handout. It was a slow, steady drain, cash flowing out of my accounts and into theirs. Loans that were never repaid. Gifts that weren't gifts so much as obligations. It wasn't just support, it was lifestyle maintenance, plain and simple. The emails made it worse. My parents had always framed Ryan's messes as bad luck and called my stability a blessing for the family. Translation: you're the cash cow. Ryan's messages were even more casual. Can you spot me a few thousand? I'll hit you back when the next deal lands. The next deal never landed. Each document, each transfer, each request, it was like putting together the pieces of a con I hadn't realized I was part of. All under the disguise of family. Then came the meeting. A sterile conference room, the kind with beige walls and polished tables that smell faintly like old coffee. Ms. Blake and I sat on one side. On the other, my parents, Margaret, and their attorney, a tired-looking man who had clearly been through more than one ugly family fight. They came in dressed like they were headed to church, serious, somber, respectable. Their expressions were tight, their smiles fake. Mom's voice quivered, just enough to sell the performance. Thomas, she said softly, like she was reading from a script, we're so glad you agreed to meet. I didn't respond. Just gave a curt nod to their lawyer. Then I turned to Ms. Blake, who was already flipping open her folder. Their lawyer started laying out their position. Carefully worded. He talked about family values, about worry and concern over my sudden withdrawal, about how families should support each other, especially during critical moments. He framed it like I owed them help. That my business, technically mine, should still be considered a shared resource during a family emergency. Then came the ask. Plain and formal. They wanted me to sell my business. Use the majority of the proceeds to fund Ryan's new venture. And, as a cherry on top, they wanted compensation for the emotional distress my actions had caused them. My parents nodded solemnly, looking so put upon. Margaret just folded her arms, her expression practically sneering. They thought I'd fold. They expected me to crack under pressure, to give in once they had lawyers and paperwork behind them. They were wrong. Ms. Blake went first. Calm. Controlled. She outlined my legal ownership of Cole's supply, the value of the business, and my absolute right to manage it however I saw fit. Then she passed the floor to me. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. Just kept my voice steady. I told them what the business meant to me. The years of work. The pride I took in building it up from nothing. Then I turned the conversation. You've spoken a lot about family and obligation, I said, looking straight at them. And I agree, families should support each other. I always believed I was doing that. I slid a thick folder across the table to their lawyer. These are bank statements. 10 years' worth. They show every major transfer from my accounts to my parents, to Ryan, to Margaret. Dates, amounts, purposes. Their lawyer opened the folder. His brows started to furrow before he even made it halfway through. This wasn't just a little help here and there, I added. This was long-term financial support. Repeated. Unreciprocated. At their request. What I laid out on that table wasn't some random collection of transfers or favors. It was a decade's worth of steady, serious financial support, covering their bills, picking up the slack, rescuing Ryan from disaster after disaster. And as I kept speaking, something shifted. That smug look they wore when they walked in started to crack. The air in the room felt different, less sure, more uneasy. Now, I continued, my voice getting stronger with every word, let's take a look at what I got in return. Not just a lack of appreciation, but outright dismissal. Year after year, my hard work was downplayed. Ryan was always the big hope, the golden ticket. I was just the guy with the cute little store. I opened another folder and handed over copies, screenshots of texts and emails. Here are the money requests. Here's my father waving off my work as just a small-time operation. Here's my sister calling it cute like she was talking about a lemonade stand. And then I slid over something new, records I'd dug up through public access requests. Documents showing Ryan's history of failed businesses, including 2 that had been flagged for questionable accounting. Nothing ever came of them, probably because the money miraculously appeared before authorities had time to investigate. And here, I said, tapping another printed page, are emails between my mother and a cousin. They talk about quietly handling those financial hiccups to protect Ryan's name. And in the same message, she mentions needing to ask Thomas for help again. There was a sharp gasp from Mom. Dad's face went crimson. Margaret looked like someone had slapped the smirk off her. Even their lawyer snapped to attention, suddenly a lot more interested in what I had to say. This wasn't just about Ryan screwing up. This was about a pattern. A pattern of deception. One that my parents actively covered for. And they did it with my money. So when you demand I sell my shop to give Ryan yet another shot, I said, letting the quiet anger surface, you're not just asking for support. You're asking me to finance the cover-up. My dad slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. That's a damn lie, he shouted. How dare you drag your brother through the mud like this? How dare you bring up ancient history? I didn't flinch. I met his glare with one of my own. Ancient history? Or a pattern you just don't want anyone to see? That was my lowest moment in the room, emotionally, anyway. The confrontation had officially gone nuclear. He leaned in close, his voice a hiss. You were always the outsider. Always judging. Never one of us. This is your way of feeling superior, isn't it? He didn't attack my proof, he attacked me. Who I was. Tried to crack me open in the one place he knew was still sore, my need to belong. And for a brief second, it worked. Doubt crept in. That old ache. Was I going too far? Was I breaking something that couldn't be fixed? But then I looked around that room and really saw them. Dad's eyes weren't wounded, they were calculating. Mom wasn't shrinking from the anger, she was shrinking from the truth. Margaret's look wasn't hurt, it was offended that I'd flipped the script. And I heard that line again. That ugly, brutal line from the living room. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. That did it. They didn't want a son. They didn't want a brother. They wanted a walking bank account. And I was done being one. I took a long breath, let it steady me, and spoke with a clarity I didn't know I had. You want to talk about destroying relationships? That started way before last Sunday. That started every time you dismissed my work, every time you chose Ryan's recklessness over my stability, every time you dipped into my life savings and treated it like your own. You said this house wouldn't collapse if I disappeared, I said, my voice low and sure. Maybe not the walls and roof. But the financial house you built? That's standing on my back. I pulled out one last folder. A thick one. Final cards on the table. These aren't just more bank records, I said. This is a financial timeline I put together. I matched up every transfer I made with your property tax records and Ryan's business filings. The patterns were undeniable. I looked straight at Dad. You've always said the house was worth around $800,000, right? Their eyes flicked toward each other. What you didn't mention, I continued, was that 5 years ago, you took out a second mortgage. A big one. And because your income alone couldn't support the loan, the bank required a guarantor. I paused, letting it land. That guarantor was me. Their lawyer blinked. Excuse me? I nodded. I co-signed. You told me it was just a formality. Said it'd help get you a better rate for some basic renovations. What you didn't say was that the bank factored in my business assets to approve it. All three of them froze. Their lawyer leaned forward, flipping through the documents with increasing concern. You didn't just want my money, I said. You leveraged my entire financial future, my company, my reputation, to prop up yours. And you did it behind a mask of family. All while telling me I was disposable. The room fell silent except for the soft rustling of paper. Their expressions had cracked wide open. No more smiles. No more smug superiority. Mom was crying now. Not the kind of crying that comes from regret, but the kind that comes from getting caught. Dad looked pale, his fists clenched, but he didn't say a word. Margaret's arms were still crossed, but her posture had changed, stiff, guarded, uneasy. Their lawyer looked over at Ms. Blake. His face said everything. He wasn't blindsided by emotion, he was processing the sheer weight of what we'd dropped. The truth wasn't just in the words. It was in the numbers. The pattern. The paper trail. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was years of quiet exploitation. And now it was out in the open. The meeting ended shortly after that. There wasn't much else to say. After a quiet, whispered exchange on their end, their lawyer turned to us and said they would be withdrawing all demands and wouldn't be pursuing any further legal action. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just silence. Bitter, broken silence. Walking out of that meeting room, I felt like I'd just finished a marathon, drained to the bone. But beneath all that fatigue was something solid, something unshakable. I'd stood my ground. I told them the truth, laid out the facts they couldn't argue with, and didn't flinch. It wasn't a courtroom victory, not yet anyway. But I'd already won something bigger, my self-respect and my freedom. The legal mess afterward was minimal, thankfully. Ms. Blake made sure they had no room to mess with my business again. Every door they might have tried to open got slammed shut. No lawsuits came. No new demands. The truth was too ugly for them to fight. But socially? That was a different story. Margaret kept posting her little jabs online, trying to twist the story her way. But the truth has a way of seeping through, no matter how much you try to cover it up. A lot of our mutual friends either picked a side or just stayed awkwardly silent. Losing some of those connections hurt, sure, but the ones who stuck around, who either believed in me or just respected my right to live my own life, they became everything. That friend who let me crash at the motel and listened without judgment, he turned into the brother I never had. And Ms. Blake, at first just my lawyer, ended up being someone I truly trusted. Not just professionally, but personally. That bond was built on respect, fairness, and something real. And with the family pressure gone, my shop finally had a chance to breathe. I could put money back into it, upgrade the tools, bring in better systems, and even hire someone to help. Cole's supply didn't just keep its head above water, it started to grow. Ryan's business? That went belly up pretty fast without my money propping it up. I heard from others that my parents hit a rough patch financially. That second mortgage they took out based on the value of my business, it turned into an anchor. That wasn't me getting revenge, it was just the fallout of their own choices. Healing wasn't some straight path. There were days where their betrayal felt like a gut punch all over again. Days I missed the version of my family I thought I had, the one I used to wish was real. My dad's harsh words, my sister's smug look, those moments cut deep. But they don't hold power over me anymore. What I came to understand is this: setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop loving someone. It just means you finally start loving yourself. It means you stop accepting toxic behavior and stop letting it shape your life. My whole idea of family shifted. It stopped being about blood and started being about connection. It became about the folks who see me, who get me, who honor my space and accept the real version of who I am. My store became more than a workplace, it turned into a little community. And the people inside it? They feel more like family than the ones I was born into ever did. These days, I'm at peace. That old house is probably still standing, still thick with tension and unspoken nonsense. But my world? It didn't fall apart. It grew. I laid down new roots, ones built on self-worth, honesty, and the quiet confidence that comes from being willing to stand alone if that's what it takes. The scars are still there, sure. They remind me of where I've been. But they don't steer the ship anymore. I built this life with my own hands, piece by piece, and no one can take that away. Let me ask you something: have you ever had to cut the cord with someone you loved? And when the dust settled, how did you make peace with it?